Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of This Week in Crypto Philanthropy, where we're highlighting the top giving news, stories, and the power of crypto for good. As always, my name is Nick Mikhalevsky, Senior Sales Manager at The Giving Block, and I am joined by my illustrious co-host, Pietro Moran, Head of Crypto at Shift4. Pietro, what's going on?
What's going on, Nick? It's good to be back. This is going to be an interesting episode and super thematic in the sense that we've always been talking about the summer ending and people getting back to work. Even we took a bit of a vacation, so we had no episode last week, and we're fully back in the saddle. A lot of good updates, and really excited to kick the fall off in a big way.
On today's agenda, we'll run through the prices as always, run through some of the donation stats that we saw over the past week. And the big highlight for this episode is talking about our impact index funds, which sometimes get, I don't want to say overlooked, but sometimes folks can forget that those options are there. So for our donors that might be listening and our nonprofits that are listening, just want to do a quick update on what that is. And then, of course, we'll round out with some of the top news. We are still doing our $500 in Bitcoin promotion when you get started with the Giving Block. So again, nice little way to kickstart the journey with us. And something else as a quick aside, for any of our listeners in the nonprofit space that are going to be in the New York tri-state area next week, there's a big crypto conference happening called Mainnet. We're hosting a nice little happy hour next Tuesday. So if you're in the area and you want to come out and talk to other nonprofits and certainly some other of our crypto friends and Web3 partners, it'd be a great way to say hi to everybody in person and have a good time. Pietro, any other shout outs you want to do for the Mainnet crowd?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be really exciting. We're always happy to meet our partners and friends in the field. So we're going to be there Tuesday, October 1st, starting at 4:30. Details in the show notes and on the slide for anybody who's observing the podcast and watching along. But only call out I want to make there is that we're going to have a really interesting kind of meeting of the minds. We love getting nonprofits together with folks and participants in the crypto industry. From my side and representing Shift4, it's always great to meet our clients and folks that are leveraging our services. Those folks can also talk to clients of the Giving Block, nonprofits that are also leveraging the Giving Block services. And then we have sort of this third party of, just crypto aficionados and participants, right? The folks that are either donating, friends of the Giving Block, or even integration partners that make kind of recurring donations or have the Giving Block kind of slotted into their product suite as well for a place where their users can find and donate to nonprofits that are accepting crypto. So going to be really excited. A nice little happy hour to kind of ring in the fall. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I know we've been away from some of the conferencing lately, so it's going to be good to see everybody in person and really make an impact.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be great to get together. So if you're in the area, we'd love to have you come out. Like Pietro said, we'll put a registration link in the show notes. And I guess, shifting gears, over to the market side of things. I mean, we talked about what we were sort of thinking September would be an interesting kind of transition time. And, man, it really has been. So a lot more, green shoots in the market going into the end of the year. Pietro, what's sort of the main themes that we're seeing?
I love episodes like this when we're having a green day. We can always report on that, right? I mean, so again, it's been the theme. We've talked about seasonality in crypto, seasonality in trading across all markets. The summers always tend to be slow for reasons that we've brought up. People are on vacation, people are doing other things than staying at their desk and staring at the chart. When the weather's good, get out of the house kind of thing, right? So crypto is definitely having a bit of a rebound. There's some news that I'll touch on later that I think is really influencing markets right now. One of which was a Fed rate cut. I'll talk about more of that later, but that also is influencing risk markets and how people are allocating. If we look at, some of the majors right now, Bitcoin's sitting at 64,500. I mean, one of the great kind of lines in finance is kind of the idea of the chip shot away from all-time highs for any of the golfers out there. I mean, we're very close from just scratching that 70,000 level and really seeing some new price discovery from what's been a pretty muted summer, a little up, a little down, but nothing too scary. And that's true of most of the assets here in the top assets that we track. Ethereum's at 2,600, Solana about 152. And then other coins are also starting to rally. What's interesting as of the last couple of weeks, and what's a little bit different from majority of the cycle's price action that we've seen so far is looks like altcoins are having a bit of a rally, and that just means for the folks that might be listening in and wondering what the heck is an altcoin, we're really talking about non-major market cap cryptos, so things that aren't Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, and some of these other coins that have a pretty sophisticated size and large market cap. What that really means, and I'll only touch on this briefly because we can really go down a rabbit hole if we want to, but it just shows that other participants and folks in the sector are allocating further out on the risk curve and getting into things that maybe aren't as quote unquote sure of a bet as a Bitcoin, or as stable, as consistent from a price standpoint, and they're taking a little more risk, and we're seeing that in the sort of broader market coming, to play that sort of catch up to what Bitcoin has been doing for the majority of this year. Bitcoin's really been in the driver's seat. The ETF flows have been enormous. We're talking in the tens of billions. Now we're seeing some of that money maybe trickle into some of these other smaller cap altcoins. And I think, to have a through line on this for the nonprofit side of things, right? We accept, dozens and dozens of cryptos at the giving block, right? And it's really great to see some of those have some positive price action, because those holders are now more incentivized to donate now that they're sitting on gains. I think that's a really big thing for the overall kind of retail crypto speculator ecosystem as well. Folks have maybe been putting their eggs in some other baskets other than Bitcoin, ETH, and Solana, and I think that's going to be a really positive and interesting thing to see, especially in light of the Fed cutting by 50 basis points, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, couldn't agree more. And, as this crypto rally starts to materialize as we head into year end, I mean, couldn't have lined up better from a fundraising perspective. So, for our nonprofits that are listening and again, curious about should we add this as an option, could be one of the best and easiest moves to make to just have another tool in the fundraising toolkit and just casting another line out there as we get deeper into the giving season. So, it's going to be really interesting to see how these major assets continue to rally, and certainly the altcoins as well. And we could go through a lot of the other donation stats we see from, some of these other donors that have some more of those, obscure assets that are booking those gains and happy to make donations to organizations to offset that tax bill. So, I guess with that, moving on to what we've been seeing in the past week from the donation stat side of things, echoing, Pietro, what you said before about Bitcoin being in the driver's seat, no question. I mean, when it comes to major gifts, we're still seeing a ton of donations in Bitcoin coming through to nonprofits, stable coins as well. But, a couple things just to remind nonprofits for, the idea of why these major gifts are continuing to trickle in. I mean, Bitcoin's up 145% over the past 12 months. And in 2023, it was up nearly 160%. So again, as we're coming into year end and people are taking a look at their portfolio and starting to, make some of those bigger year end allocations, which we always see as part of that seasonality, still represents a huge price appreciation, and the tax optimized donations, especially when Bitcoin's concerned, could yield some pretty significant gifts, just like we continue to see. A couple of highlights, one of the largest Bitcoin donations of the past week was about $70,000 that went to sort of smaller to mid-size camp. So again, if you feel like this is only going to some of the bigger blue chip charities, think again. This, crypto donors are literally everywhere, and everybody's always surprised at how much crypto is in their existing network once they have a clear and easy way for people to give. And to kind of round things out, I mean, some of the churches on our network and our faith-based organizations have been doing tremendously well, especially this year. And I think just the fact that it's now in more of people's occupying more people's mind share again. Prices are up. People are at a number they're comfortable with. We continue to see even faith-based organizations that tend to have, again, a more defined donor base, right? This isn't like a mass universal appeal across, entire, country. It's just sort of just the congregation or the parishes in those communities, and churches finding some fantastic donations. So another church receiving close to $20,000 in crypto just in the past week. So again, if you're crypto curious, but even if you think, hey, we've got sort of a small pool of donors, again, you may be surprised at what you find when you just simply ask around. Um, and I would say that, for the nonprofits that are listening, our year-end fundraising toolkits, if you're an existing client, go in, take a look at those. They're packed with all kinds of great strategies and templates. It's a fantastic playbook to follow if you want something kind of easy at your fingertips that you can slot into all of those donor communications that you're having, gearing up for Giving Tuesday, a year-end appeal. Maybe you've got a gala that's coming up in the next few months. Take a look at those. And if you're not a client of the Giving Block, just know that when you do come on, this is a fantastic way to get activated. We sort of have a fantastic, like I said, playbook already designed for you that you can plug and play into all those things you're doing. So we really leave no stone unturned. So our team has put together an absolutely phenomenal year-end toolkit this year. So definitely definitely should check it out. Um,
I want to make a quick point on that, Nick, if you
yeah,
will humor me, right? I think one of the
yeah,
things that's really interesting in hearing you talk about this slide is you talk about how, year over year, Bitcoin's up a ton, right? And the stats are incredible. The performance has been great, especially compared to a lot of other things that people are investing in. One of the things that really strikes me is also we're not even at all-time highs on Bitcoin right now. And we haven't been for some time, right? I mean, certainly all of the summer and, since earlier this year. And so one of the things that tells me is that, a lot of the things and the enthusiasm we're seeing are at a point where Bitcoin hasn't even done like a massive move above its old all-time high. And I think that just shows to me that there's still maybe a lot of room in the tank for a lot of enthusiasm, exuberance around this industry. And I think we're just starting to scratch the surface. I mean, that's a bit of a hypothesis there, but what's really cool is that we're seeing these major gifts when people aren't even back to sort of the quote unquote high watermark or like old level of where their portfolio used to sit when it was at all-time highs from last cycle, assuming that they just held it all the way through. And so I think that's going to be really cool to watch. And if the fall and maybe early next year play out in a way that's very constructive for the ecosystem, it only goes up from here, so to speak.
yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree with that more. And, the ones that, are doing really well, the organizations that, are capturing the mind share of donors are just the ones that are making it really easy to see. They're letting donors know it's an option, and they're telling those donors frequently so that, as these donors come back and they're ready, maybe they've got that number, it's the time we're coming up against, the deadline there for tax season. And hey, I've got to make a donation here. Those donors already know who they're going to. So again, our toolkits help in that area as well. And to I guess to kind of dovetail off that, we talk a lot of times around like the nonprofit's own websites and how best to capture that mind share and get in front of donors and strategies and things like that. But one of the things that sometimes again, I don't want to say gets overlooked, but a really cool feature of the Giving Block is that we have various ways that donors can spread around their generosity. And our impact index funds are a really cool way for people to support multiple charities all at the same time. Now, where this came about, if we sort of just wind the clock back a little bit and a little bit of history, is that on the Giving Block platform, we would see certain donor behavior playing out, and we'd see a philanthropist who had a particular affinity towards some type of cause, the environment, animals, health and medicine, whatever it is. They had some type of organization that they just enjoyed supporting, that kind of programming. And they would literally click into every kind of nonprofit in that category and make a donation here, a donation there. Wouldn't it be great if someone could give across all those organizations in one fell swoop? So that was the genesis of the Impact Index Fund. It's something that lives on the Giving Block website. So for nonprofits out there, it's when you're on the Giving Block platform, it's another great way to just have your organization on the menu for donors. And as you can see on the screen, we've got sort of the screenshot of all of the different impact index funds that we have. There's all kinds based on the type of industry, so to speak. We have certain featured funds. You could see some of those at the front, and then of course it's the same donation form that a donor is using on your website or on your profile in the Giving Block, and a number of different assets too. So they could give in crypto, card from their donor advised fund. And, in these funds, doesn't matter if you're the world's largest charity or you're the world's smallest. When donations are made into that fund, it's split equally across all the nonprofits in that category. So it's great. It's not based on size, and we're not splitting those donations up in any different way. But also for the nonprofits that are in those categories, could be a great way that you get some additional benefit just by being associated with maybe some organizations that do a really great job attracting donors that want to give because of a certain type of program they're doing, or they're just doing a great job with crypto donors and they want to have another way of showing their generosity. The last thing I'll say is, as we're getting into year end, this sometimes can be a really attractive option for those donors, because again, they want to either spread that around, or for some of those, maybe call them, I don't know, like last minute donors. Maybe they don't have a particular organization in mind. I just know that I'm sitting on some pretty big gains. I should probably do the smart thing tax wise by making a charitable contribution. Let me see who I can donate this to. And maybe if they don't find a particular organization that's top of mind or they want to do, oh, cool, great. Here's an impact index fund. I love supporting environmental conservation orgs. I'm going to make a donation here. It's going to go to everybody. Or I would say, to lastly, sometimes we have donors that just want to spread something around entirely across the Giving Block network. So there's something called the Crypto Adoption Fund, which goes to every nonprofit on the Giving Block ecosystem. So from time to time, certainly at year end, we see some of those donors coming in, just plunking a nice donation into the Crypto Adoption Fund. And hey, anyone that's taking, anybody that's on the Giving Block platform, it's going to get a nice little donation to their nonprofit. So it's really great. It's something that gets divvied out every single month. And for those nonprofits that are thinking about how to sort of anticipate or expect, the kinds of volumes that come in here, think of this like just sort of extra icing on the cake. It's certainly not going to be the main way that people are sending donations on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis, but it's a nice added tool so that when there is some significant generosity, or even just generosity that's coming in throughout the year. Again, this is something that we do every single month. You never know when, a certain donor's motivations are going to hit. And certainly there's a big incentive at year end, but there could be other times throughout the year. And we see this happen all the time. I think it was a couple of years ago, we had a organizations in, I believe is our mental health index fund, that saw a massive windfall with every organization receiving thousands of dollars in that month's distribution. So again, want to highlight, it isn't something that is an everyday occurrence, but it is just a great way to position your nonprofit for success across the crypto ecosystem. And this is a fantastic tool, not just for nonprofits, but for donors as well.
When you talk about this too, it kind of makes me laugh a little bit. What you describe is like to a T me as a donor. Like, yeah, I know a few nonprofits and places that are dear to me in the sense that like there's your alma mater, there's your, organizations that might be local to your area. But in terms of when I first, started going through the Rolodex of, crypto accepting nonprofits, right? The analysis paralysis was real for me. And I was like, you know what? I care about XYZ theme, maybe I'll just make a donation there. And, I've been a personal user of the impact index funds in that regard. So, I mean, it is very helpful for those that maybe either don't have the time to scroll through, a couple thousand names, or to just want to make sure that everybody gets a piece of the pie. I think it's super cool. For those who don't have that really targeted direct impact that they want to make with a single nonprofit. This has definitely been, helpful to me. So shout out to the product team on that side, because I've been the net beneficiary there.
Yeah, absolutely, and I do the same. Just speaking personally, I always like supporting some of those organizations that are meaningful to me. But it's always great. I always get a great sense of pride, just sort of kicking something into those funds, knowing that there's you know a, a ton of organizations that are seeing a little extra benefit. So if you're a donor out there that's listening to this, check out those impact index funds for our nonprofit partners that are out there. It's something you're included in. There are some details around how we sort of fit you into which impact index fund that fits you the best, but they are a fantastic way of making sure your nonprofit is set up for the best possible position to see some generosity across all kinds of different giving methods. So, so that'll close things out for the impact index funds and kind of the donation side of things and the fundraising side of the house. But a lot has been also happening in the wider crypto industry. I feel like there's been a ton of news. So I know Pietro, it's probably hard to whittle down the list this time, but what's been sort of top of mind?
Yeah, you hit that nail on the head for sure. I mean, this was, especially with us taking a week off with the episodes. I mean, I was scrolling through the headlines from the last couple of weeks, and I was like, wow. I mean, that could be an episode in and of itself, and even multiple episodes. I wanted to focus on a few things that were a little more like, rubber meets the road in the sense of adoption of crypto and talking about some of the things that are impacting the market. So the first thing is talking about PayPal. This is a really recent announcement, but PayPal, as some people may know, has been active in this space. They launched their own stablecoin, PYUSD. They're leveraging that infrastructure to, assist and make, money movement a lot easier under the hood. Sometimes folks maybe don't even realize that it's being utilized, but it's just a huge efficiency to move money around. But what they've done now is they've enabled US merchants to buy, hold, and sell crypto directly from their accounts. That's in 49 states, excluding New York and the US. I think that's really interesting because we've seen and talked about, maybe alluded to a little bit on this, podcast, that some of the larger corporates out there have utilized some form of a Bitcoin strategy. MicroStrategy, the company, is the sort of pioneer in that respect, or at least the most well known that's doing this. They buy and hold a lot of crypto. They offer, convertible notes to the market for folks who can't invest in Bitcoin directly through some investing mandate. That's maybe a little bit finance jargon, but effectively there's institutions that can't touch crypto itself, but they can touch an institution or an SEC regulated entity like public stock that is exposed to crypto. They've done exceptionally well. I think it's the best performing stock in the S&P 500. Pretty insane stat. This is effectively like a Bitcoin proxy. To see this with PayPal, right? You have a lot of smaller, mid-sized merchants that use PayPal, I would say. I think that's allowing for these folks sort of downstream or down market of, say, the mega cap large public equities that can now partake in crypto in a way that's really seamless within a integration / infrastructure that they understand, and a user experience that's really easy. And maybe we'll see some adoption here. I think it's at the minimum really nice to have feature, and at the potential maximum of this, maybe you see folks starting to diversify their cash into Bitcoin as a balance sheet asset for their business. I think that's going to be pretty interesting to watch. So it's a bit predictive now. The announcement just dropped recently, so we'll be keeping tabs on that to see what that sort of level of adoption is from the more corporate size. I mean, you think about it this way, right? The analogy that I typically think of when I read this is like, what if you're a solopreneur or a small business, right? You're covering your costs, you're making ends meet, and maybe life is good. And now you're thinking about, well, maybe I have some cash reserves. What do I want to do? Do I want to grow the business and expand, maybe buy a new location or start a new product line? Or maybe do I want to sit on that cash, or cash like asset, something liquid, something that is still a bit of a speculation. You buy some Bitcoin maybe, and you say, maybe I'll hold that as sort of a nest egg for the business for 3, 5, 10 years down the line. Maybe that's going to influence some of that user behavior, and we'll definitely keep tabs on the metrics going forward from that. So pivoting from that, we're going to go from like very direct and actionable, update to something very macro and very broad, which I alluded to earlier, which is that the U.S. Federal Reserve has cut interest rates by 50 basis points. On the face of that, for somebody who maybe has no idea what that means, what the Federal Reserve does is it controls the Federal Reserve like Fed funds rate, which is the short end of the yield curve. It's basically, short-term lending markets, very, very impactful every time the Fed changes. So what that does in terms of people can also understand is it also influences things like mortgage rates and things like when you go to refinance your house, what's the rate look like? People have probably been talking about, both politicians and people on Main Street who feel this very, acutely, that rates have been going up over the past 18, 24 months. And they've been going up in a pretty aggressive clip, right? For folks who remember from COVID, right? People were getting 30-year mortgages for like 3%, some unheard of deals. And that was really an exercise and a tool to come out of COVID and really incentivize more investment, more, money flowing through the economy and trying to get us back on our feet from what was a really difficult time. Then the Federal Reserve corrected. They raised rates a ton. Now it's like difficult to borrow. It's difficult to get a loan on a house that's super affordable, right? That's been a huge talking point from both sides of the aisle in terms of how does that get fixed. And U.S. Federal Reserve is independent of any political party, but it is an apparatus sort of the federal government to control the money supply, et cetera. So what does this all mean, right? Because we're trying to talk turkey in the sense of like, where does this actually make a difference for people? Typically, and this is really looking at historical data more than anything, when interest rates get cut and come down, people are more incentivized to take risk. When Federal Reserve cuts interest rates a ton, that means more borrowing, more money circulating in the economy, typically coincides with higher inflation. Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, who's the chair there, thinks that we've, kind of put the nail in the coffin on inflation to a certain extent that they feel comfortable cutting by 50 basis points. 50 basis points also just means 0.5% for anybody who doesn't use that terminology. And all this to say, from a crypto perspective, typically Bitcoin and other cryptos perform well in lower interest rate environments because of that excess cash and incentivize risk taking to kind of reflate the economy for people to put money into riskier things. Because the other thing to consider is when you can earn 5% on your cash on treasuries, that's looked at as a lot safer than putting it into a stock or a crypto or something else. So now we're seeing some of that pendulum swing back, some of that money come back into the economy. It's probably one of the reasons why our price update was so constructive and positive today. But I can't underscore the importance of this, because what likely happens is they cut a couple weeks ago, they'll probably cut interest rates further. I mean, if you talk to other folks, much more experienced and seasoned than myself, it's not typical that the Federal Reserve will just cut once and that's it. It tends to be in these sort of like incremental steps of hike it, raise it a couple times, then cut it a couple times, and they kind of let the sort of beach ball go below and above water to some extent. So that is the point on the Fed Reserve rate cut. Nick, I know you follow this pretty acutely too, or pretty keenly. What's your take there?
Yeah, I mean, all to say, I mean, I think for the nonprofits and the fundraisers that are listening to this too, I think the main theme here is just knowing that crypto could be entering in a favorable environment, right? There could be some nice tailwinds here. This move by the Federal Reserve is typically seen as something that's been reflective positively on the crypto side. So again, you might have donors that are going to see some higher appreciations. Maybe that leads to some more generosity. In any event, it's a better environment from where we were, and we're starting to see some of that play out in some of the markets. So again, just lining up for a nice confluence during giving season, and it could be a factor in a donor getting to kind of like that number that they were looking for to start making some of those tax optimized gifts. So yeah, we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, that's totally spot on. It's no guarantee of prices going up, right? Otherwise, investing would be super easy. But at the same time, we look at the data and we make our best guess and hypothesize on that. And not that this is a show for financial advice. I just think that when there's an interest rate kind of regime change from raising to cutting, those are typically moments that you want to keep an eye on. And not that nonprofits or anybody really has to be a macro expert, but it may be a sign of some better times to come in respect to asset appreciation. And like you said, folks having some gains that they might need to park in other places. So that's kind of that on the Fed Reserve cut. Last thing I want to shout out to, and this is maybe for sort of the wonk side of me, because I want to shout out Castle Island Ventures, Visa, and Brevin Howard, among a couple other of their partners, who released a report on stablecoins in emerging markets, looking at and surveying people who actively use them. They're asking them, what are they doing with stablecoins? Like, how do they participate um, in the crypto ecosystem, leveraging stablecoins in their day to day life, leveraging them as a financial tool, and kind of getting into the nitty gritty of what exactly are people using crypto for? And stablecoins are really interesting for folks listening that maybe don't know what those are. Stablecoins are effectively, 98% of all stablecoins issued are really one-to-one dollar-backed crypto tokens that represent a dollar in a bank somewhere in the world through an issuer and custodian. So basically, you buy something like USDC, it's a dollar for dollar equivalent, but it's in a crypto context. It allows you to participate in the crypto ecosystem with a token that represents, what would otherwise be a dollar in your bank account or a dollar cash in my wallet. And this is a really powerful tool, especially outside the United States, right? Because in the US, we have dollars ubiquitously, right? It's the currency we use all the time. We have all the sort of advantages of a modern banking system. And that's not always true across the world. You may be in a country where you have severe inflation. Argentina, some of these other countries have had, really bad inflation. We talk about places like Turkey or other emerging markets where government mismanagement of the currency and inflation has hurt their ability to save. One of the insights from this report that I thought was really, really great, and I linked to it in the show notes. It's a long and conclusive report, so I'd encourage anybody to read it if they have the time. But one of the key findings is that a lot of these folks are leveraging stablecoins as a dollar savings tool where their bank might not offer dollars as a way to save or a way to get exposure to a currency that isn't their local one. I found that really interesting. Another thing that people are using it for is the ability to earn yield on their assets. As many people know, here in the United States, you can buy US Treasuries, you could park your money in a high interest savings account, CDs, other instruments. Not always the case. Some of the countries they went to were Nigeria, Indonesia, certain parts of Asia and Latin America. I think, in Brazil, it's not as obvious where you can go and get your yield as it is here in the US. And so we're seeing crypto be that bridge to the rest of the world in a meaningful way, right? People, I think 2,500 people were surveyed for this who are active crypto users. It talked about what wallets they're using, where they're leveraging crypto. And what I'm starting to see, and this is really from my payments brain talking, but what I'm starting to see is this sort of trend of people leveraging crypto to circumvent or maybe enhance the current banking infrastructure they have to get more tools to enhance their financial literacy. For one, so they have to get up on the learning curve, but two, they can enhance the things that they can do and plan for the future in a different way. I think that's really, really cool. It's not really a speculative thing like we talk about. It's not like people making two times their money and then donating some of it, but I think it's showing where crypto is becoming a part of everyone's financial life, to the extent that it's giving them more opportunity, kind of leapfrogging some of the tech development that's necessary to create kind of a modern banking infrastructure for the average person. And even in Nigeria in particular, I think it said in the study that an insane proportion of those surveys have all used like Phantom Wallet, for example, which is like kind of becoming like your second bank account to your local alternative. It blows my mind, right? We think of typically crypto as being like, maybe I buy some Bitcoin, I buy some meme coins, I do this and that, and it's fun, but like, I keep my money at JP Morgan Chase, right? For example, not the case for other people. And so I think this is a really, really fantastic study to talk about people on the ground, real people using it for buying goods and services, for saving, for conducting their financial life in a better way than they otherwise would. Nick, I would love to get your take on this too, because I'm so in the weeds on this that like I could talk for hours, but like maybe we can get somebody else's opinion on it.
Yeah, I mean, from the nonprofit side of things, I mean, we always see, heavy stablecoin, transactions, and for all those reasons, right? In the U.S., it's for a different reason, but for international orgs as well. You mentioned sort of a way of sort of improving their savings technology. Again, we could see those, international donors using things certainly like the major cryptos, but these stable coins as well as a way of giving back through different channels and just giving people more tools than they would otherwise likely have, or the traditional methods just being much more manual, much more clunkier, maybe a lot more barriers to actually do that. So just opening up a new frictionless way to do all kinds of things, from merchant transactions, non-speculative things, charitable contributions, you name it. So just a fantastic all-around tool. And yeah, I think we'll continue to see this blending of the traditional space and the digital asset space, as these years tick on. So a lot's going on. I guess to round things out, we are very hopeful that the crypto market is in a pretty good place, and we'll see how this shakes out as the year end giving season gets deeper. But from where we're sitting today, this could be a very impactful 2024. Check out our impact index funds. We'll put a bunch of links in the show notes for everything that we talked about on this episode. And for any of our nonprofits that, again, are gearing up, getting those tools and those, platforms ready and finely tuned for the year-end giving season, check out our year-end fundraising toolkits. They're going to be a fantastic resource to make sure that you're absolutely buttoned up and in the best possible position to make 2024 a real bang. So on behalf of myself and the rest of the team, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.